John Cameron's my name, and the Commodore of the best sailing club in the world, CYCA. Welcome to competitors here today from around the world. And it's a pleasure to be able to say thanks for being here and being part of our great race. Firstly, I'd like to start with a few words from Patrick Bertellier, General Manager of Rolex Australia. And he wishes to express Rolex is proud to be part of the 71st edition of the Rolex Sydney Hobart yacht race and wishes all skippers and crews a safe race to Hobart. First, I would like to introduce Michael Logan, Manager, New South Wales Weather Services, VOM. Michael.
Thanks, John, and it's fantastic to be here. The format of this year's presentation will be very similar to the past few years, so we do want to spend a few words going through the forecast terminology, just to make sure that everyone's completely clear about what's in the Bureau forecast, the services that we offer, and then obviously spend a bit of time focusing really on the forecast for the race. So as we go through forecast terminology, when we're talking about wind strength and direction, just to make sure that everyone's quite clear that we're talking about wind is a forecast of the 10-minute mean. So when you see all the forecasts, that's the mean wind speeds. So we generally split those into the 8 compass points as you go around from 360 degrees. And remember, wind gusts can be 40% stronger than these 10-minute averages. And so the little chart there just shows, you know, the 1-minute gusts or the 1 second gusts is much higher than the actual 10-minute mean winds. Keep that in mind, especially when we're talking about the southerly change on the first night or the first evening of the yacht race. And of course, squalls with thunderstorms and showers can be slightly higher again as well, so it's worth keeping that in mind. With waves, and you'll see in a minute that we've actually enhanced our service when it comes to waves as well, so really need to split those into the sea state and the swell state. So we talk about seas and we do talk about swells. So seas are obviously locally driven by the local wind, and swell can come from more of a background source. And we'll certainly see that play out on the first evening of the race, where the sea state will start to get whipped up from the southerly change, whereas the background swell will still come from the easterly trays that have been across the Tasman Sea. And there's a graph there that just sort of illustrates that when you're looking at the wave spectrum and when people are out there, they often experience a lot of the local sea state. There's some more general waves that come through. We measure the significant wave height, which is the highest 1/3 of waves that people generally experience, and that's what's displayed on the wave rider buoys. But don't forget that the maximum waves, which can be up to twice the significant wave height, you might expect to experience those a couple of times across a 24-hour period. They are there, and people need to be prepared to deal with them, and they can be, as I said, 2 times the significant wave height. Just another reminder about the warning criteria. So strong winds, the gales, storm force, hurricane force. So the strong winds is 25 to 33 knots. Definitely in play for the first 24 hours of this race. And don't forget that the gusts, okay, so 40% stronger, so that does mean gusts of 35 to 47. So the forecast will be in mean winds. So don't forget these gusts. Gales, 34 to 47. Does look like the lower end of those gales might be in play for the southerly change, so have a look at that. But don't forget that does mean gusts of 47 to 66 knots. So there can be some pretty strong gusts with these gale force conditions. Not expecting storm force and hurricane force at this stage when the categories are there. And just that reminder that the storm force wind is not to do with thunderstorms, it's actually a wind warning category. In terms of the services that the Bureau provides, and just to really quickly recap on the coastal waters forecasts, they do extend from the coastline out to 60 nautical miles seawards. Those are issued, and the warnings are updated every 6 hours or as needed if there's a change in conditions. And that overlaps with the, and just to quickly go through the coastal water zones that you'll be actually sailing through. So we start off obviously in Sydney, and go down through Sydney, the Illawarra, the Batemans Coast, the Eden Coast, the East Gippsland Coast, east of Flinders Island, upper East Coast, lower East Coast, and the South East Coast. And in terms of marine, an example of the coastal waters forecast is there. So it does have a synoptic situation to give you a bit of an overview of the weather, and then the details for each of the coastal waters wind zones for each day. Some of the coastal water wind zones are quite large, and we do have to try to keep the text as brief as possible so that it can go out over the radio for broadcasts. So there is some detail missing in there, but hopefully you pick a lot of that detail up in the graphics. The wind warnings these days are very much a summary, and the details of the actual wind conditions are contained in the actual forecasts themselves. And our coastal waters forecasts do overlap with the high seas forecast. Now these forecasts do cover a huge area, but they do, obviously that extends a lot more than 600 miles seawards. But they do come all the way into the coast, and there should be good overlap. It can be useful if you're wanting to head well offshore. The official forecasts are there, and they can be used in conjunction with graphics to give you a feel of what to expect. And in terms of graphics, so Meteorology is the main tool that the Bureau uses where we display all of our forecasts. It's updated twice daily, sometimes in between if needed, but certainly routine to be updated twice daily. And it's where you can go to get your graphics, and it has an awful lot more detail than the text forecast. So there's 3 hourly time steps in there, and it does include wind, waves, and weather as well. And this one is one of the changes that the Bureau has introduced to the services in the last 12 months is to do with the waves forecast. So we spoke before about where we had the splitting the wave spectrum up into waves and swells, so the sea state and the swells. And so on this graphic here, you can see we used to just only include the significant wave height, but now we actually split it up into wave height, so what's locally forced, and also the background swell, and sometimes there is 2 background swells. So I actually have the ability to put in swell 1 and swell 2 for the 2 background swells, and we can see here that on Boxing Day, the dominant background swell will be coming out of the east or the east-northeast in the trades across the Tasman Sea. And that will still be there for a few hours even after the southern change goes through, so that's working. The Marine Weather Services, there's a dedicated marine site box on the Bureau's, on our main website. You can link through where all the marine services are. It does include the tides and the currents, they're on there as well. And there is a light version of that, so you're out and you're on mobile phone coverage or you're on limited data coverage and everything's running a little slow. There is a lighter version of that site, which is text only, no graphics, but you'll get forecasts just a little bit easier in terms of data usage and downloads. And of course, don't forget the other channels to actually access the information, which is very much over the radio, and of course the internet still being there as well. And we also include, and there is a summary on our webpage about all of the services that are there for the racing community. So there's designing, and we keep working on this to make it a bit of a one-stop shop so you're aware of everything that we've got to provide. And there is a campaign, and a safety campaign that we will run across summer, which is very much based around the 5 vital checks. So just a reminder to everyone from a safety point of view, check the warnings, check the weather, check the wind, check the waves, and don't forget to check the tides as well. Preparation, and that's also obviously what we're here to do today. We'll talk about the warnings, the weather, the wind, the waves. And so we'll now start very much focusing on what to expect for the race itself. A new visualisation of the satellites on the website. There is higher resolution 10-minute satellite imagery that you can get. It comes from a new generation of satellites that have come online over the last few months. 10-minute imagery with only not that long a lag, up to half an hour after the image has been taken. It's already there and available to you, and you can see clouds, fronts and everything involving quite a lot of detail with this new imagery. It's a little data hungry, so it may be a bit of a problem when you're out on some of the boats. But if you're on land or if you've got great data coverage, then it's a fantastic way. And you can even see things like southerly changes moving from the coast. So a lot of detail in the satellite imagery. We see here a fair bit of trade wind cloud and out over the Tasman Sea. And right down in the bottom left, as we're looking at it, that's we're starting to see the first signs of the strong front that will come through in the evening of Boxing Day. And the chart just shows that of the southern coast of Perth, but in between, a bit of a trough in the Tasman Sea and a high in the southern Tasman Sea, so there will be a bit of just weak trade winds through that area over the next few days. So tracking the progression of that front as it starts to approach, and we can see they're very much heading into Christmas Day. What we're looking at is waiting for the onshore flow that we've been having for the last few days to continue to break down. The high becomes established, and hopefully that means it's not too many showers around tomorrow. And the high for Saturday is the dominant feature as the front starts to approach. So that's where the pre-front northeasterlies are at the start of the race. And then the front sweeps through, and it's quite an active front. And active in terms of strength, and active in terms of we've got quite a lot of humid air ahead of it. So there'll be a fair bit of weather in terms of rain and thunderstorms coming through this front as well. Visual forecasts, possible shower tomorrow, hopefully not too much with it, especially the afternoon. It'll be pretty reasonable, we think. Shower should be developing for Boxing Day. Very much the timing of the front's going to be critical. Really think that the back end of the day is when all the weather activity comes through. So hopefully for the start of the race, it's still looking like the conditions will be quite good for the start of the race. Cloud increasing, yes, but quite mild on the harbour. Temperatures in the mid-20s, the northeasterly is increasing, but then the worst of the weather comes through later in the day. And we actually start to see that in terms of the graphics here. So for the start of the race, around about 15 knots inside the harbour, so quite a decent building northeasterly breeze. As soon as you get outside of the harbour, those northeasters will freshen further. Certainly increasing up to 20 to 25 knots not long after you get outside of the harbour, and the seas will be becoming choppy. Start of the race, yeah, very much think that the weather will be closing in on Sydney, but it will still be coming from the west. So conditions on the harbour do actually look quite good for spectators at the start of the race. And we'll be monitoring the timing of this front quite closely for that for the next 2 days. By the time we get to 5 p.m, those northeasterlies should have built to 20 to 30 knots, particularly off the Illawarra coast. The sea's starting to become choppy to rough and continuing to build further, and the weather's starting to close in, so we'll be surprised if we're starting to see the first showers or the first rain starting to close in on Sydney sometime around this period. And then probably the main story for the first night, or first evening of the race is this southerly front that's coming off the coast. It's not, certainly not a really strong one, but it does pack a fair bit of punch with it. 25 to 35 knots is what's on the forecast at the moment. That does fringe into the lower end of the gale warning category, so there probably will be a gale warning with this southerly. It will make for rough conditions, and there will be, it's not a very strong background swell, but there will be a little bit of background swell out of the east-northeast even after this southerly first goes through. And quite active weather as well, so not just the winds. So as this front goes through, we are expecting rain and thunderstorms. So yes, the wind forecast is 25 to 35 knot mean winds, but especially with the thunderstorms, watch out, there could be some squally winds just as this front, particularly as the front goes through. So it's certainly setting up quite an eventful first night and quite windy conditions as this front goes through. The southerly winds for Sunday, they will begin to moderate on Sunday. What's critical with this one is how fast and how far east of Tasmania the low develops in the far southern Tasman Sea. And guidance is really trending towards that low that develops being well east of Tasmania, and its influence on the wind field starting to ease reasonably quickly through Sunday. Maybe slightly quicker than what these graphics have, but we will see southerly flow continuing on Sunday, and it will slowly begin to moderate. So it'll go back from the gales back into the strong wind warning category, and sometime Sunday dropping back to those strong wind warnings as well. And so we just start to see that more in these graphics. So 11 o'clock Sunday, further easing of the winds across the race fleet, the race forecast, and starting to see on 5 o'clock on Sunday, you do start to see these lighter winds starting to take shape in the lead of Tasmania. Very dependent on how quickly that low pushes out into the Tasman Sea. But what you do start to see there is the next high is starting to come through from the west, and it's just extending just a little bit of a ridge right through Bass Strait across the race course. And that's really going to be where the winds start to drop out. So how quickly that high can get through will really be the dominant feature of the winds to drop out. And we're starting to see more and more of that by Monday at 5 a.m. And if we go through towards late Monday on the next slide, and that's the kind of thing that looks like starting happening late Monday. And if that low does push and clear away earlier, we may actually start to see this influence happening slightly earlier in the race. And what we see there is the high starts to push out into the Tasman, and it allows the winds to not only ease right off, but they back around through the east and eventually try to go back into the northeast. So that will be the trend that we start to see late Sunday, certainly through Monday. And how quickly that happens will be very dependent on how fast the ball moves away. And it really means that there'll be lighter winds across most of the race course through that period. The next front that most of the models have only looks like influencing the southern part of the race course later on the 29th. And we'll certainly be fine-tuning that and put some more detail into that when we do the final briefing on the morning of Boxing Day. In terms of currents, the main Eastern Australia current probably starts to break down just off the Hunter Coast there, and then it gets a little bit variable further south. So there's a few spots where it's northerly current, and there's a few spots where it's southerly current. So have a good look at the currents on the website and see how they look like playing out. And there's a graphic here of just what they look like closer to Tasmania as well. So yeah, certainly some variable currents in terms of direction. And then the forecast for Hobart, as we're heading down that way, 28th, 29th and 30th, they certainly really have fairly light winds through that area, particularly up the Derwent. So I'm sure that will be fine-tuned as we get a little bit closer to the boats coming through. And conditions actually looking quite reasonable, so no really strong fronts coming through, so reasonably mild conditions. Relatively settled with minimal chances of rain, so Hobart's forecast looks actually looking very pleasant for the race finish. So in terms of summary, conditions for the first 12 to 24 hours really do hinge on this front that comes through. It's looking pretty reasonable for spectators at the start of the race. Weather closing in later that day, so starting off in the breezy northeasterly conditions, building as you go out through the heads, and then getting hit certainly fairly early on in the evening for the lead boats by what will be a stronger gale force southerly change, and that will dominate the conditions for the first line of the race. And we'll revisit this all again very quickly on the morning of the 26th of February. So safe sailing everyone, thank you.
It's over the beaches.